Hey everyone, it's Murphy. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be making a video all about the things that you should do when you bring a new plant home. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have already brought a bunch of new plants home and you may or may not have done all of these things, but I just wanted to give like a full in-depth guide of what you should do. I'm not saying that I do all of these things, I'm just saying that I should be doing all of these things, right? And the plant behind me is actually one of my newest plants. It is a Hoya burtonii, and I actually haven't really gone through any of this process with it yet, and I really needed to. So that's what we're doing today. Alright, so before you bring the plant home, especially if you're bringing it from a big box store like Lowe's, Home Depot, Trader Joe's, if they have plants, Walmart, anything like that, you want to check the leaves for pests. A lot of houseplants coming from these big box stores will come with pests, such as spider mites, fungus gnats, mealybugs, thrips, anything like that. And you don't want to bring that home to any of your plants unless you are ready and equipped and experienced with dealing with plant pests, because you don't want to waste your money on a plant that has pests already and could die. And if it's possible, lift the plant out of the pot. Most of the time, if it's from a big box store, you'll be able to do this. You lift the plant out of the pot and you can see the surrounding root ball. If the roots are really dark or if the soil smells kind of swampy, the likelihood of that plant having root rot is really high, and you probably shouldn't get it because the likelihood of it surviving is really low. So after you bring your plant home, the first thing you're going to want to do is remove any dead foliage. The dead foliage can actually attract pests and a bunch of other problems to your plant, such as infection. Also, you just really want the plant to look nice, but if you leave dead leaves on, your plant isn't going to look as nice, and it can attract pests, which is just an entire problem in and of itself. You really want to remove that dead foliage because it could already have pests on it, it could be attracting pests, it could be stressing the plant out, and also they're just really unsightly. And what you want to do is get some scissors. Even just picking them out of the soil with your hands can work, but what I like to do is I like to get scissors and just chop the little dead leaves off. Luckily with my burtonii there weren't many dead leaves and there wasn't that much dead foliage inside the plant, but a lot of the time some of that dead foliage will be hidden underneath the top layer of leaves, and that's where the pests can really get you. You want to dig around under those leaves and you want to pick out anything dead, any stem, any leaf, anything that you see that is dead or decaying or brown or even just like crinkled up. You really want to remove that because it can be really beneficial for your plant, and it also just makes it look better and it cleans it up a little bit. I'm sure it makes the plant a lot happier. The next thing you're going to want to do is aerate the soil. Now by doing this, it really makes the soil less compact, and chances are if you're bringing a plant home from a big box store, that soil is going to be really compacted and tight. In my experience, when I purchase plants from Lowe's or Home Depot, that soil is suffocating those roots. You can pretty much pull the plant out of the pot entirely because that soil is so compacted that it's holding its shape almost perfectly. And what you want to do is you can get a chopstick or any kind of stick, even a fork. You will stick that into the pot over and over again, and you will break up that root ball, because what you're doing is really giving the roots an opportunity to breathe, and roots do need oxygen in order to survive and thrive. And aeration can also help with watering, because sometimes soil will become hydrophobic, meaning that the water looks like it's going into the plant but it's really going down those sides. And like I said, you can pull that plant out of that pot, and in that space between the soil and the pot, that's where the water is falling, and so those roots aren't actually absorbing any of the water. Roots need oxygen, or else you can risk root rot or even dry rot if your soil is too compacted and that soil is hydrophobic, so none of those roots are actually getting any water. Speaking of watering, if you are able to pull that plant out of that pot and it comes out in one big ball and it holds its shape, you really want to aerate that soil. And also that's a sign that the soil is really dry and it desperately needs to be watered. And sometimes in these big box stores, these plants can go weeks without water, and even if they are being watered, again, if that soil is hydrophobic, that plant isn't retaining any of that water, so basically it's just drying up. If you can't pull that plant out of that pot, but you're still worried that the soil is dry, I would recommend a moisture meter. This is a moisture meter. I really recommend them. They're super cheap if you get them from a big box store, but they tell you how much moisture is in your soil. And you can use this to tell you whether or not you should water the plant. If it's something like an aroid, I would wait until it says dry, but if it's a calathea or a begonia, I'd wait until it's right in the middle or even just a little bit lower. But with aroids, you really want to reduce the risk of root rot by letting the soil dry all the way out. And with these moisture meters, you can also measure light and pH. There are settings on the bottom for it. And when you're watering your plant, you can go ahead and do some pest prevention and treatment by rinsing off those leaves really thoroughly. If you did happen to bring home any pests, rinsing those leaves off can really help get them off. And those plants will most likely come with dust on them from sitting on those shelves for so long. And dust can reduce the plant's light consumption, which in turn can make it grow slower and even make some leaves die off because the plant isn't getting enough light to survive or thrive. Speaking of pest prevention and treatment, I really recommend treating your pests as if they do have pests when you bring them home. Even if you don't see any pests before you bring it home or after, I really recommend going ahead and treating it as if it does have pests. I do have a TikTok that I posted of all of my favorite pest prevention and treatment products, so you can go down in the description and check that out. I'll have a link to it. I really recommend Captain Jack's Dead Bug Brew. It's great. It works wonders for my plants, and if you do see pests, you really want to get in there and on those leaves and like go in depth and rub that product in. But if you don't see any pests, I like to just give it a quick spray. It's really easy, really simple, doesn't really take much time or effort. Although if you're using neem oil, it smells absolutely rancid. The next thing that I know you've probably heard before, but I just want to like nail it into your brain, and that is isolating or quarantining your plants. Now, I cannot stress how important this is. Even if you do your pest treatments, even if you check the plant and there's no pests on it, I really strongly recommend isolating it or quarantining it first. And this doesn't mean putting it in a separate room, because some people might not have a separate room to put their plant in. And I know that you're excited when you bring your plant home and you're like, I know where I'm gonna put it. I'm gonna put it right here. Or if you're like me, you bring a new plant home and you're like, okay, where do I put this actually? But if you're the first option and you already have a place picked out for that plant and you're really excited to put it there, just wait. Or do what I like to do and put your plants in plastic bags. This is a really easy solution if you don't have enough room to put that plant elsewhere, or if you're just really excited to put that plant in that place. And yeah, the bag might look ugly for a while, but it can also really help the plant thrive. When you put that plant in the Ziploc bag, it really raises the humidity, which helps most plants absolutely thrive. Now, for succulents and cacti, the humidity doesn't really help it that much, but for calathea, begonia, aroids, pretty much any common tropical houseplant, that bag is gonna help it thrive. And you can even keep your plants in bags for longer than their quarantine period, because if you don't already have somewhere in your home where the humidity is extra high, using a bag can really help those complicated plants to grow and be really happy. If you own cloches, that's also a really good option. Plants look super cute in them, and it's a great way to quarantine them. And sometimes quarantining a plant doesn't mean keeping it out of a room that there's other plants in, but it can also mean just keeping it in a different space. So say you have one corner of your room that's full of plants, and say you have another corner that has no plants. I would put that plant in that corner. Even if there's lower light conditions, that plant is gonna be able to survive it for at least a couple of weeks. But I really recommend the bag method because plants don't like to be moved around too much, especially those complicated genuses like calathea. They don't love being moved around. Once you put them in one spot, they don't like to be moved, and they can be really dramatic about it. So I would really recommend the bag method for sensitive plants. And for aroids and stuff, honestly, you could throw an aroid at a wall and it would probably grow up the wall. Like you could chuck it at a wall and it would just be like, oh, okay, new home. Anyways, back to the video. I have two things that I want to talk about that you shouldn't do when you bring a plant home. Number one is repotting. When you bring a plant home, it's already gonna be really stressed out and possibly even in some kind of shock. So when you repot a plant, that really stresses it out. It gives it a whole new environment, and it's already in a whole new environment on the top half, and now you've just put the entire plant into a whole new environment. And when you repot a plant, a lot of the time they get a little shocked anyways. That's why we don't recommend repotting plants when they have new leaves coming out, because it can actually make those leaves come out crinkled or messed up. Just the plant needs stability in order to thrive. And when you repot a plant, it can make it thrive, but it can also shock it and make some of those leaves die off, and you really don't want that. Speaking of shocking a plant, fertilizer. If you're buying a plant from pretty much any plant store, you might find these little round pellets in the soil, and that's actually slow release fertilizer. And when you fertilize a plant that already has fertilizer, you can really overwhelm that root system, meaning that the plant could potentially go into shock and die, or just struggle a lot. And sometimes that won't happen, but you're just wasting fertilizer, because plants don't require fertilizer to grow. Your soil already has a lot of nutrients in it, unless you haven't changed the soil in like a year. Then fertilizing, in my opinion, is important. But we're talking about when you bring a new plant home. So you won't have had that plant in that same soil for a year. But there might be slow release fertilizer in the soil. So fertilizing a plant when you first get it really isn't that good of an idea, because you're either wasting your fertilizer, putting your plant into shock, stressing it out, or all three. And who wants to do that? That's just, none of those are great options. I would wait at least a few months before fertilizing a plant, honestly. I know some people wait a few weeks, but I would wait like 2 or 3 months, unless you're in growing season, in which case I would just look around the soil to see if there are any slow release pellets, and if there's not, then I might go in with some fish fertilizer or some liquid dirt, some like natural fertilizers, not chemical fertilizers. I don't really recommend those anyways, but to each their own. Everybody, you know, uses different things. For repotting and fertilizing, I like to wait a few months after I've brought a plant home, just because I am extra cautious with my plants. I don't want them to go into shock. I spent money on them. I don't want to risk anything happening to them at all. I am super careful with them. If it's a rehab plant, the repotting rule doesn't apply. If it has root rot, repot that hoe right now. But repotting and fertilizing can really stress your plant out, and I really just don't recommend it until a few months after the plant's been acclimated. Anyways, that was all for today's video, you guys. I really hope you enjoyed watching, and I really hope this helped you guys. If it did, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more from me. I would really appreciate it. It helps support and grow my channel so much, and I will see you guys next week. Bye!